Lecture 35, Faults, an Introduction. A fault is a surface or narrow zone in the Earth's crust, along which one side has moved relative to the other, in a direction parallel to the surface or zone. A, B, and C are examples of faults. If the fault plane is not vertical, the term hanging wall block can be used to refer to the rock above the fault plane, and the term footwall block can be used to refer to the rock below the fault plane. These terms were originally used by miners. The hanging wall is the part where you hang your lantern. The footwall is the part where you stand and walk. Any fault is described by a displacement or slip vector. Determining the slip vector requires the recognition of two originally adjacent points on the fault surface. Lines displaced by the fault may be recognized in several situations. These lines intersect or pierce the fault plane, one on the footwall and one on the hanging wall, to give the required points. These are called piercing points. A shows the piercing points produced by the line of intersection of two fractures, which was offset by the fault. B shows the piercing points produced by the hinge line of a fold, which was offset by the fault. The slip vector of fault with oblique slip can be decomposed into strike slip or slip parallel to the strike of the fault, and dip slip or slip parallel to the dip of the fault. The slip vector can also be decomposed into a horizontal component of slip and a vertical component of slip. Finally, the dip-slip component can be decomposed into a vertical component called throw and a horizontal component called heave. So, throw is the vertical component of the dip-slip vector, and heave is the horizontal component of the dip-slip vector. Faults can be classified according to their displacement into dip-slip faults, strike-slip faults, oblique-slip faults, and rotational faults. Dip-slip faults can be classified into normal faults, if the hanging wall block moves down with respect to the footwall block. And reverse faults, if the hanging wall block moves up with respect to the footwall block. Strike-slip faults can be classified into right lateral or dextral faults, and left lateral or sinistral faults. In right lateral faults, an observer standing on one block will see the other block moving to the right. In left lateral faults, an observer standing on one block will see the other block moving to the left. Oblique slip faults can be classified according to their strike-slip and dip-slip components. For example, sinistral normal, or sinistral reverse, as well as dextral normal, or dextral reverse. In rotational faults, the magnitude of the slip vector changes along strike, so that there is rotation of the hanging wall block with respect to the footwall block. This figure shows the slip vector in a block diagram and on a stereo net, in a normal fault, strike-slip fault, and reverse fault. On the stereo net, the fault plane is the great circle, and the slip vector is the red dot. Though we have described so far faults as surfaces, in reality they are narrow volumes with an internal structure. These narrow volumes are called fault zones. The fault zone consists of a fault core, which is a millimeter to meter thick zone of high deformation that accumulates much of the fault displacement, and a damage zone, which is the surrounding rock volume of deformed rock. In the damage zone, brittle deformation consists of fractures, deformation bands, and faults. Ductile deformation consists of folds. This is a picture of an outcrop with normal faults within Permian-Triassic sediments, in Moab, Utah. A close-up of the outcrop in this area looks like this. The lower figure is an interpretation of key layers and faults. Notice that the larger faults are actually fault zones, with an internal structure, and the presence of smaller faults, some of them dipping in opposite directions, towards or away from each other. A close-up of this area looks like this. Here we can see fault striations, a fault core with lenses, and the hanging wall, HW, and footwall, FW, in the damage zone. This is an outcrop of a normal fault in western Sinai. The footwall block are Cretaceous folded rocks dipping towards the fault. The hanging wall block are tertiary rocks, dipping away from the fault. The area labeled FC is the fault core, which has lenses. The small white rectangle is a person for scale. This is an outcrop of a reverse fault in Utah. The fault is in Middle Jurassic sandstones and siltstones. The fault zone and folding of the hanging wall block near the fault are interpreted here. The white rectangle is a person for scale. To learn more about faults, read Chapter 9 of Fossen, and do his e-learning module on faults. And answer these questions.